It's a real pleasure to have here one of the strong partners that the Mitvim Institute has since day one of its inception, the representative of the U.S. Embassy in Israel, DCM, Stephanie Hallett. Thank you so much for being here with us. We are talking about strategies, we are talking about hope. One of the reasons for hope over the last years was Israel's regional relations and ties with different Arab countries, actually most of which are ones that you served at as a diplomat. In Saudi Arabia, in Oman, in Egypt. So we have a lot of experience in the regional relationship, and we are here to talk not on all these changes happening in Washington these days, but about the role of the US in shaping the reality of Israel in the region. But part of the reality in the region depends also on the international reality of Israel, and what we heard today in the news about the ICC arrest warrants will definitely have some impact not only on Israel's global standing, but also on how different regional countries see Israel. So what is the US response to what happened today in the ICC?
Thank you. First, thank you for the privilege of being here with you all today, with Mitvim, all of you. Appreciate the opportunity to represent the Embassy of the United States here. I'm glad you asked about the ICC. I think if it is not out yet, I think you will see a statement from President Biden coming out very shortly that reflects our view since the indictments were issued, which is the following. One, that the ICC does not have jurisdiction in this instance, and that the complementarity principle has absolutely not been applied. The prosecutor had the opportunity to get on a plane and come here to have discussions with Israel, and as Secretary Blinken has said repeatedly, we have been engaged with the ICC to encourage that process, but instead he chose not to get on the plane and to allow Israel to have the time and space for its legal process to proceed. And so I think you will see very shortly officially from Washington very strong objections that reiterate the points that I just said.
Thank you for sharing that. There's quite a lot going on in the news today. Okay, so we also have the U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein once again here in Jerusalem, meeting with the Israeli leadership. We've seen a lot of investment by American diplomacy throughout the year in trying to de-escalate the tensions along the northern border of Israel, and now there seems to be some progress being made. What can you share with us about the negotiations, the arrangement is being debated, and the actual prospects for success, if you can reflect on that, although it's definitely unknown yet?
So it is true, yes, that our special envoy Amos Hochstein is on the ground as we speak. I unfortunately can't get ahead of the discussions that are happening in real time in Jerusalem, or the discussions he just had in Beirut. But what I will say is that the conversations have been very constructive, very positive, and it's very clear that all sides want to be able to do two things. One is bring civilians back to northern Israel, especially those who have been displaced. Yair Lapid just referenced them as well, who have been displaced for 13 months to be able to go home. The same is true for civilians in southern Lebanon as well who have been affected. And frankly, as someone who lives here in Israel, all of us who continue to be affected by Lebanese Hezbollah actions and attacks that we have become so used to here in Israel. I think the imperative to be able to support sovereign Lebanese institutions is a key part of this as well. But certainly Israel's security is foremost in the negotiations, as well as getting people back to their homes longer term.
And another aspect that we saw American involvement in throughout the year was the attempts to reach a ceasefire in Gaza and to bring the hostages back home and to end the war. Unfortunately, despite heavy investment by the president and other American officials, and despite quite a number of optimistic statements coming from Washington, we didn't reach this goal yet. So there's a lot of narratives on Israel on why that didn't happen. But as you look back on American involvement, how would you characterize it, and why aren't we still ending the war from your perspective?
So I want to talk a little bit, just looking back on the last 13 months of the United States involvement in and support for Israel, as President Biden has said repeatedly, is ironclad in terms of Israel's security. Looking back, before I come to the diplomacy piece, I just want to mention we cannot talk about the diplomacy without talking about the defense and deterrence and support for humanitarian assistance as well. All of it is tied together when it comes to looking at Gaza, Lebanon, the region more broadly. So in terms of defense, certainly it's very clear that the United States support for Israel's defense has been robust since day one. In terms of the amount of assistance that the U.S. has provided, it's over $13 billion in bipartisan supported rapid assistance for Israel. The deployment of sophisticated defensive systems, and I think as we saw on April 14th and October 1st with Iran's direct attacks on Israel, the U.S. being there to help defend Israel. So that's in one category. The deterrence as well, the U.S. sending, as part of our efforts, not just on the Gaza piece, but to be able to contain the conflict as much as possible, to be able to send unprecedented in recent memory 2 carrier strike groups here to be able to do that. Those things go hand in hand with the diplomacy when it comes to Gaza specifically. Now, it's not lost on me that it was a year ago, a full year ago, that we were able to work with partners in the region, the Israelis, Israeli government directly, to secure the release of dozens of hostages. It's been a year. It's a long time, and those efforts are continuing and will persist. It is not an option for the United States, as long as we have 7 hostages, or there are any hostages, whether or not they're American citizens or not, to not continue to work and try to find the formula that works to secure a ceasefire deal that first and foremost sees the return of hostages. But part of that diplomacy is also working on the day after plan, putting effort into working with Arab partners, working with the Palestinians, working with Israel, to be able to work on what comes next. I wish we could snap our fingers and have a ceasefire tomorrow that sees 101 hostages come home. It will, in all likelihood, be something that is iterative. But the work that has to be done for the day after plan, the post-Hamas Gaza plan, is something that could not wait and did not wait. And those efforts continue to this day as well, to be able to pull the pieces together to ensure that Israel's security, first and foremost, is maintained, strengthened, that Hamas is degraded such that militarily, that it cannot pose the same threat that it did on October 7th going forward, and that the aspirations and the values that we share in terms of the Gazan civilian population are realized in a post-Hamas Gaza situation. So all of that work continues to this day. In looking back at 13 months, I regret that we have not been able to find that formula that has secured that, but I always remember that it is Hamas that has rejected constructive agreements. Just yesterday, the United States vetoed a UN Security Council resolution, as you all know, that did not mention Hamas and did not talk about the need to have a hostage deal as part of a ceasefire agreement. That's a really strong indicator of where the administration is. And again, I just want to restate, as long as there are hostages, the United States government, regardless of administration, will not stop working and trying to find the right formula that gets them home.
And we hope for that to happen. In his opening remarks, Dr. Marciano spoke about partnerships with the Arab world, with Arab think tank. And the visions for the day after that we hear in those partnerships are very different than the ones we hear in Jerusalem. And we are concerned for the future of Israel-Arab relations. We saw so much progress with countries who signed peace agreements with Israel, who have normalization of ties. How do we secure those, and what is the American role traditionally in shaping the Israel-Arab relationship, and what will be the way to kind of bring back those ties to the level that they were before the war, including all those minilateral and multilateral initiatives that the U.S. actually played a very significant role. Yair Lapid spoke about the Negev Forum, we remember the I2U2, IMEC, a lot of American initiatives. So how do we restore back the trust, the spirit of cooperation that we had a year ago?
Well, I think a key piece of getting back to the deepening, continuing to deepen Israel's relationship with existing Arab partners and then expanding normalization. Saudi Arabia is a key goal, certainly, that the United States and Israel share, is going to have to be related to Gaza, certainly, as these countries look to their publics who are understandably worried about what they see happening in Gaza and the length of this war and the civilian toll that it has taken, which is why the imperative of a hostage deal that results in a ceasefire is critical to all of those aspects. Now, the role that the United States has played, even though there has not been in the last 13 months a Negev Forum meeting, there has been a quieting of diplomatic engagement among some of the existing Arab partners, they're still intact. And I think it's important to remember that none of these countries that have normalized relations with Israel already, either historic or under the Abraham Accords, have in fact severed diplomatic relations with Israel. That's not something to take for granted on Israel's part, or frankly, these countries' part as well. And so I have no doubt, though, because the strategic imperative of those relationships for Israel and for those countries is still there and will be there today and when we are in a post-Hamas Gaza situation, and the United States will continue to exert leadership where that's concerned.
Thank you. And maybe one final question, because we are talking about hope, and you listen to what has been already said, and the word peace is less and less being spoken about by Israeli officials, by Israeli leaders, by even the Israeli public. Belief in the two-state solution has been declining, yet the American position is very strong. The two-state solution is feasible. So maybe a word on that. How does the US see the two-state solution feasible? And maybe that will help us somehow convince our public that this hope for peace and even the word of peace should still be kept in our lexicon.
Yeah, I think the vision for a two-state solution is still very much real, still very much a part of the Biden administration's focus, and a long-standing bipartisan vision over many decades, as you all know very well. Look, I think Israel's security has to be at the center of that, and the ability for Israel to have partners to work with on the Palestinian side, and frankly for Palestinians to have partners on the Israeli side as well. That can be challenging. There are ups and downs in history where that has been concerned, but certainly the prospect for a two-state solution is always there, and as a diplomat, I'm always an optimist, and having spent my whole career in this part of the world, it's part of our ethos as diplomats. It's part of what we seek, regional peace. There are many pathways to that, but certainly continuing to focus on winding down the war in Gaza in a way that preserves Israel's security, but also helps realize the aspirations of Palestinian people and those in Gaza who are suffering the most, behind whom Hamas is hiding every day, is a critical piece of that.
Stephanie, thank you so much for not only giving us a survey of what could be done in the region, but also reminding us the importance of optimism when you look at diplomacy and the regional relations. Thank you.
Thank you.